My home was my fortress, my sanctuary, my tangible proof of a life well lived. It wasn't a mansion, just a modest three-bedroom ranch in a quiet neighborhood, but every square foot of it was earned. I could point to the exact spot in the living room where I'd proposed to my wife, the pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe tracking our daughter's growth, the worn patch on the lawn where my son learned to kick a soccer ball. This house was the physical manifestation of my life's philosophy, slow, steady, and secure. I'm an accountant by trade, a profession that suited my risk-averse nature perfectly. I believed in spreadsheets, in predictable returns, in the slow but certain magic of compound interest. My financial plan was a masterpiece of caution, designed to weather any storm and deliver us to a comfortable, debt-free retirement. Then came Dave. Dave was my best friend from college, and in many ways my complete opposite. Where I was cautious, he was bold. Where I planned, he improvised. He was a day trader, a man who spoke in a rapid-fire language of tickers and options that I never fully understood. He drove a flashy car, wore expensive watches, and possessed an infectious, almost dangerous level of self-confidence. For years, we'd had a running joke about our different approaches to life. He'd call me a snail, and I'd call him a hare, each of us convinced of our own wisdom. But recently, his favorite topic, the one that dominated every conversation, was Bitcoin. He talked about it with the passion of a convert. He saw it not just as an investment, but as a revolution. "You don't get it," he'd say, leaning forward with an intense energy. "Your whole strategy, your 401k, your savings account, it's all being eaten alive by inflation. You're trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it. Bitcoin is the lifeboat." He painted a picture so vivid, so compelling, that it began to erode my carefully constructed walls of skepticism. He framed it in terms I could understand. A hedge, an asset class, a piece of a diversified portfolio. He wasn't telling me to abandon my strategy, he argued, just to add a rocket booster to it. One Saturday afternoon, while we were grilling burgers in my backyard, the very backyard my predictable mortgage was paying for, he wore me down. "Just try it," he urged, pulling out his phone. $1,000, it's less than you'd lose on a bad stock market day, just see what happens." To put an end to the conversation as much as anything, I agreed. He walked me through the process on my own phone. It felt illicit, like I was buying contraband. Within minutes, I was the owner of a small fraction of a Bitcoin. I didn't think about it again until a week later when Dave sent me a text. "Check your lifeboat." I opened the app. My $1,000 was now worth $1,200. I had made $200 for doing absolutely nothing. It was surreal. The following week, it was up to $1,500. It was the easiest money I had ever made in my life. The feeling was intoxicating. It was a secret thrill, a validation of Dave's worldview and a tiny crack in the foundation of my own. I started checking the price obsessively. Every green candle was a rush, a confirmation of my newfound genius. I put in another couple of thousand from our savings. That grew, too. I mentioned the small digital investment to my wife, who, trusting my financial judgment, simply nodded and said, "That's nice, honey." Dave, of course, was ecstatic. "See," he'd say, slapping me on the back. "What did I tell you? You're a natural, but this is just the beginning. You're still just dipping your toe in the water. The real money, the life-changing money, is for people who aren't afraid to get wet." His words echoed in my head. I looked around at my modest, secure life, at the house I was so proud of, and for the first time it didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a cage, and Dave was handing me the key. The taste of easy money is a powerful drug. It rewires your brain, making the slow, sensible path you've followed your whole life seem tedious and foolish. My small, successful foray into Bitcoin didn't satisfy me. It just made me hungry for more. Dave was only too happy to be my pusher. "The problem," he explained to me over beers one night, "is that you're still thinking like an accountant. You're thinking about percentages. A 50% gain on a few $1,000s is nice, but it's not going to change your life. A 50% gain on a serious amount of capital. That's how you get to the next level." My mind immediately went to the source of all my capital, the biggest asset I had, my house. It was a terrifying thought, a line I never imagined crossing. My home was my security, the very definition of a safe asset. But Dave had a way of reframing things, of making the insane sound perfectly rational. "You're sitting on a pile of dead equity," he said, scribbling on a napkin. "Your house has appreciated, right? That's money that's doing nothing for you. You can take out a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, at what, 3–4% interest. Bitcoin is up over 100% this year. It's the simplest arbitrage in the world. You're borrowing cheap money to buy an asset that's exploding. The bank is essentially paying you to take their money and get rich with it. His logic was a seductive trap. He presented it not as a gamble, but as a sophisticated financial maneuver, a strategy the wealthy use all the time. He made me feel like I was a fool for not seeing it sooner. The biggest risk, he argued, was doing nothing. I knew my wife would never agree. She was even more risk-averse than I was. The idea of taking on more debt against our home to buy a volatile digital currency would have been a non-starter. So I made the decision that would become the root of all my problems. I decided not to tell her. I rationalized it as a surprise. I would take out the HELOC, make a fortune when Bitcoin inevitably moonshot, pay the loan back in a matter of months, and then present her with a paid-off mortgage. I would be the hero, the brilliant husband who had secured our family's future with one bold move. The process was unnervingly simple. Because of my good credit and the equity in our home, the bank was happy to approve a six-figure line of credit. Signing the papers felt like a betrayal, a knot of guilt tightening in my stomach. But it was overshadowed by the exhilarating rush of what I was about to do. The day the HELOC was active, I didn't hesitate. I drew the entire amount. Seeing that many zeros appear in my checking account was breathtaking. With a few clicks, I transferred the entire sum to my crypto exchange account and placed a single market buy order for Bitcoin. I watched the order fill, and in that instant I had tethered the fate of my family's home, the very symbol of my life's work, to the wild, unpredictable price of a digital asset. I felt a paralyzing wave of fear, immediately followed by an intoxicating sense of power. I had taken the biggest risk of my life. Dave was ecstatic. "Welcome to the big leagues, my friend," he said when I told him. "Get ready for the ride." For the first week, the ride was incredible. The market continued to climb. My investment was up by a staggering amount. I was a genius. My plan was flawless. I started browsing for new cars online, fantasizing about the look on my wife's face when I told her what I had done. I was standing on top of a mountain, completely oblivious to the fact that it was an active volcano. The market turns when you least expect it, and it does so with a viciousness that feels personal. It started on a Sunday night. A cascade of negative news, rumors of regulation, a major hack on an exchange, sent a shockwave through the market. I watched in disbelief as the price of Bitcoin, which had only ever seemed to go up, began to plummet. A 10% drop became 15%, then 20%. My breathtaking profits from the week before were wiped out in a single evening. I called Dave in a full-blown panic. "What's happening?" I stammered into the phone. He was calm, almost dismissive. "Relax," he said, his voice a smooth balm on my frayed nerves. "This is classic FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's just the big players trying to shake out the retail investors, people like us. This is the dip we've been waiting for. The weak hands sell, but we have diamond hands. We hold. This is where fortunes are really made." I clung to his words like a drowning man to a life raft. He was the expert. He had been right before. I trusted him, so I held, but the market kept falling. Every day was a fresh new hell, a sea of red that ate away at my capital. The six-figure HELOC I had taken out was now worth significantly less, but the debt remained, a fixed, unmovable anchor of my stupidity. The first HELOC statement arrived in the mail. Seeing the balance owed and the minimum payment due in black and white was a brutal splash of cold water. This wasn't a game on a screen anymore. This was a real debt, with real consequences tied to my real house. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake at night, my mind racing, staring at the ceiling of the very bedroom that was collateral for my catastrophic bet. I'd sneak out of bed and check the price on my phone, praying for a miracle, only to be met with more losses. The stress began to bleed into every aspect of my life. I was irritable and distracted at work, my meticulous attention to detail gone. My wife knew something was wrong. I was distant, withdrawn, and prone to snapping over the smallest things. "Is everything okay at work?" she'd ask, her brow furrowed with concern. I'd lie, mumbling about a difficult project, the dishonesty making me feel even worse. The secret was a cancer, eating away at our intimacy, creating a chasm between us. Our home, once my sanctuary, started to feel like a prison, its walls closing in on me. Every monthly mortgage payment was a reminder of the secure life I had put in jeopardy. Every time the kids would ask for something, a small toy or a trip for ice cream, I'd feel a pang of guilt knowing that our family's financial cushion was gone. I continued to talk to Dave, but our conversations had changed. My desperate pleas for reassurance were met with increasingly hollow-sounding platitudes. "It's a long-term play," he'd say. "You only lose if you sell." But I could hear the strain in his voice, too. The hair was starting to look just as winded as the snail. I was trapped. Selling would mean crystallizing a devastating loss that I couldn't possibly afford. Holding meant praying for a market reversal, while a crippling debt slowly bled my family's finances dry, all while living a lie to the person I was supposed to trust the most. The fortress I had built was under siege, and the enemy wasn't at the gates. It was inside, and it was me. The breaking point arrived in the form of a letter from our daughter's school about an upcoming field trip. It was a modest expense, less than $50, but as I looked at our budget spreadsheet, a document I now viewed with a sense of dread, I realized I didn't know where the money would come from. The HELOC payment had consumed every last bit of our discretionary income. We were officially house poor not because of the mortgage, but because of the secret debt I had shackled to it. That evening, my wife came to me with the permission slip. "Can you sign this?" "I need to send it in with the check tomorrow," she said, her tone casual. I stared at the form and something inside me just broke. I couldn't maintain the facade for one more second. "We can't afford it," I mumbled, my voice barely a whisper. She looked at me, confused. "What are you talking about? It's $45. And then it all came out. In a torrent of shameful, halting words, I confessed everything. The full extent of the HELOC, the Bitcoin gamble, the catastrophic losses, the lies. I watched her face cycle through a storm of emotions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, a cold, hard anger that was more terrifying than any shouting could ever be. The silence that followed my confession was the most painful sound I have ever heard. "My home," she said finally, her voice trembling with a rage I had never seen. "You gambled with our children's home, based on advice from Dave." She didn't have to say anything else. I saw it all in her eyes, the complete and utter annihilation of her trust in me. The next few weeks were the darkest of my life. We were like two strangers cohabiting in a house filled with tension and resentment. The threat of foreclosure became a real and terrifying possibility. I started selling anything of value: my collection of vintage cameras, the good furniture, my father's old watch. I took on freelance accounting work at night, desperate to scrape together enough cash to stay afloat. The friendship with Dave was shattered. I couldn't look at him without feeling a surge of bitter resentment, and I'm sure he couldn't look at me without seeing a reflection of his own recklessness. Our shared dream had turned into a mutual nightmare, and the easiest thing to do was to simply stop talking. It was my wife who, after weeks of barely speaking to me, finally forced the issue. She sat me down at the kitchen table, a stack of bank statements between us. "We are not losing this house," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "This is not how our story ends. You are going to sell it, all of it, today." It was a command, not a suggestion. The thought of selling at such a massive loss was sickening, an admission of my ultimate failure. But looking at her determined face, I knew she was right. Holding on was just clinging to a false hope while our real lives drowned. I sold everything that day. The final number was a gut punch, a fraction of what I had put in. The money was immediately transferred to the bank, paying down a huge chunk of the HELOC. It didn't solve our problems, but it stopped the bleeding. It pulled us back from the brink. The aftermath is a slow, humbling process of rebuilding. We didn't lose our home, but we lost years of savings and our sense of security. The HELOC still exists, a scar on our finances that will take years of disciplined, frugal living to heal. My relationship with my wife is a work in progress. The trust I broke is not easily repaired. I am earning it back day by day, spreadsheet by spreadsheet, honest conversation by honest conversation. I no longer believe in shortcuts. I have learned in the most painful way possible the true value of my fortress. It isn't measured by its market equity. It's measured by the peace of mind it provides, the safety it offers my family. I almost traded that all away for a digital promise, for a friend's foolish advice. I learned that the riskiest investment isn't in a volatile asset, but in betraying the trust of the people who make a house a home. That was my truth, but now I'd love to hear yours. What lesson did you take from this story, and have you lived through something similar? Drop your story in the comments, because this channel isn't just about telling stories. It's about building a space where people can connect through their own experiences.